All right, Chevre, why don't we get started? First of all, welcome to everyone and to everyone who is already celebrating or getting ready to celebrate a Chag Purim Sameach. I also just wanted to note, given the seriousness which so many of us who are responsible for communities are taking the evolving COVID-19, and in the spirit of Purim, maybe it's really COVID-19, which is a daf we'll be studying at some point in the future. If incidentally any of you are trying to think about how you might do something like this with your own community so you can do learning, please don't hesitate to email or private message me. I'll be happy to be a little bit of tech support for the field. We're going to try to stay within our schedule, and as much as a group of progressive rabbis can. With that said, we're going to invite everybody to put themselves on mute, and then don't forget to put it back on when you want to share something. Also, just a reminder, we are recording this. We had a number of people who wanted to participate, but are very busy with their own Purim carnivals or whatnot. But it will get posted to the group, and we ask that it not get distributed beyond that. We're going to have 3 shiurim today. We'll begin with 2 shiurim on Berakhot. We'll have the opportunity to do some group reflection at the conclusion of that, about not only what we've learned, but what this experience has been like. And then Joseph is going to lead us into the Massechet that began today in Shabbat. We're going to try as much as the technology will allow for there to be really free flow conversation. But if it turns out that doesn't work out, at the bottom of your screen, you'll also see that there's a chat function within Zoom. And if it turns out that it's hard for us to figure out who's going to speak next, whoever's facilitating their piece of learning can call on folks so that we have a little bit of seder as we conclude the first of the Sidrot. Before we really launch in, just a huge thanks to Heather and to Jean and to Joseph for stepping up to do some teaching. A number of you have already indicated via the Google Doc that this wasn't the Massechet you were ready to jump in on, but that you're eager to teach in the future. And at the end, we'll give you the save the date for when we'll be ideally all finishing Shabbat. And obviously a huge thanks to Joseph, who kind of led us. It was in some ways, at least for many of us, the person who had a great idea and then actually acted on the great idea and pulled this group together. And I think it has led to a significant increase in people studying Torah, and that's what this is all about. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will turn it on over to Heather, who's going to lead us through the first study.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Andrew, for being our MC today. Shall we all start with the La'asok B'divrei Torah?
Please.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. All right, well, it's such a privilege to be here today. I know I'm going to keep this pretty short, but I wanted to start off by asking everybody, you know, when we try to teach Talmud to people, and by the way, there's handouts and they're online, and I'll put them on the screen too. But just to start out, when we want to teach Talmud to people, what are some of the main things that we need to kind of prep them for or tell them before we actually begin to study with them? What are some of the messages that we want to teach them before we start? Anyone want to share a little bit about what you think? I'll put them in here. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up if you can see it. Good, okay, great. So if you're going to teach someone new to Judaism about the Talmud, what would you want to tell them to engage them, empower them, or motivate them? How do you
Some context of what the book is.
Okay, context, right? History.
Yeah, that Talmud is what Judaism is based on.
Great.
That basically the fundamentals of how Jewish law works, how Jewish law thinks, is in there.
Great. Any others?
Talmud is the start or a continuation of the conversation, but not necessarily the end of a conversation.
Nice. Any others? Good. So taking these, when we look at Berakhot 2a, where we start the Talmud, it raises the question, why do we start the Talmud here? It's such a seemingly difficult text to learn. Now, if we think about it from the point of view from someone who's new to Judaism, right, we can find at least 7 really problematic pieces. You know, if you're trying to teach someone, remember, in the ancient world, boys before 14 were supposed to be learning Talmud. So this is supposed to be meant to be able to be grasped by someone before 14 years old. And if they weren't, then they would be taught a trade. So to just jump right in at 2a, it's really hard because there's no ramp up. It's oriented toward those with prior knowledge that, hey, by the way, there's prayers, right? You can't just teach anyone off the street about this who's never met a Jew, who's never engaged in Judaism. It's really difficult because you have to have prior knowledge that there's prayers. It assumes that beyond that you know what the Shema is. It assumes that you know that there's rules for how you recite the Shema. It then goes into talk about the priests, which kind of come out of left field and it feels really irrelevant. And it gives 3 answers for a question, and then it has a tangential story with that, within those answers. So it's not a clear answer. And then by the time we bring the Gemara in, it comes up with not answers, but whole other questions. And the questions are, on the whole, they're meta questions. So it's one of the most difficult texts to think about teaching somebody. You can't necessarily just jump right in. And here's some text to kind of show you that, right? It starts off from when that is, from what time does one recite the Shema in the evening. This is hard because, again, you have to assume prior knowledge. You should know what the Shema is. You should know that there's limits to when it should be read. Second, when it answers, I'm just showing you how all of these things work. When it answers, it shows that from the time the Kohanim enter, they eat their truma till the end of the first watch. It assumes that you know about these priests and the link between the Torah and the Talmud, and seeing that that's relevant. Then they give multiple answers. Why do they give so many answers? Right? You've got the answer of Eliezer, then you've got the answer of the sages, and you've got the answer of Gamliel, and they all disagree. And then they bring in this random story about Gamliel. And then Gamliel brings up the burning of the fats on the altar again with the Levites and the Kohanim. And then it kind of ends with the Gemara, which then asks the question, by the way, why are we on this topic? And why are we talking about this topic from the point of the evening first and not the morning? Doesn't that sound backwards? So to bring someone in off the street into Talmud with this page seems really difficult. I don't know, did anyone else have a hard time thinking about how we could possibly teach the groups of people that we teach Talmud to? How do we even teach this text?
I was so, I mean, I remember studying this in rabbinical school, but I think this is actually such a fabulous text to begin a study with, because it introduces the whole idea of questions without answers, shakla v'tarya, like the give and take between rabbis, and the fluidity of Jewish law. You know, when is the evening? Well, it might be when the dogs bark. Well, it might be when the babies eat. It might be when you can see your neighbor. There's like so many questions in Judaism without answers. So when people say to me, why does a Jew wear that beanie on his head? Right? It's the same thing. I could give you 3 answers. I could give you 13 answers, 33 answers. It all comes from here, from the very first thing is asking questions. I think it's a great place to start.
And that is exactly the entirety of my teaching today. Perfect. No, that's perfect. No, we're the same kind of rabbi, because we take something, that's my question, right? Does studying these confusing texts as a progressive rabbi feed us spiritually in any way? What do we get out of it? And how do we extract the meaning out of it for ourselves and those in our spiritual care, right? So I presented you with a kashia, like with a difficulty. And now I'm going to tell you, like, the way that I do it is I start with the premise that it is intentional, that it does teach us something. I'm assuming that the rabbis meant to do this because they're so intentional in everything else, that there was a reason. And then I work backward and say, what is it teaching us? And my decision personally is that this is actually the perfect text to begin with, precisely as Elise mentioned, because number one, because it doesn't assume that you know things. It's brilliant because it doesn't belittle people, right? When someone says, this is what Judaism, it's the religion of the Jews, and talk from a basic point of view, and things already, it's really demotivating. But precisely because it doesn't assume that you don't know things, so it assumes that you know something, it doesn't belittle those of us who know it, and it actually inspires a practice of asking questions for those who don't know, exactly what Elise just mentioned. It throws people right into the culture of Talmud study, asking questions and teaching the Jewish ways. So it teaches that the Talmud respects us and it won't speak down to us. And for those who don't understand, questions are important. So aren't those like one of the most fundamental things that you want to teach someone? Questions, ask a question if you want, and you know things already. 2, because it begins with the most famous piece of liturgy, right? The most keva of keva, right? Shema, it's something we've been saying for thousands of years. It provides the best shot of being familiar to whoever does study, right? So because it starts with something so basic, it's giving those who are very new to Judaism a little ledge to hook onto, to hold onto, to say, look, you even aren't starting from your zero knowledge. When those people come up to us and say, oh, I don't know anything about Judaism, you're like, wait a minute, you know the Shema. You can do this. So it's a way of reminding people that, everybody knows something, and from there start building. It encourages people. Number 3, because it shows that there's rules regarding the observance of rituals that were not covered in the Torah, right? So it doesn't have in the Torah that these, sons of priests came home late and they weren't sure if they should eat their truma or not. It legitimizes the whole endeavor of oral law. So it teaches that we're trying together how to figure out how we live the Torah. The Torah can't tell us every answer to every situation, but it's showing us that we're together trying to figure out how to live the Torah. 4, because it shows that the tradition is intimately linked with the written Torah through alluding to priestly practices and showing proof texts, it shows that this is not some new religion that the rabbis are engaging in. In fact, though, it is an extension from what is already sacred. So this teaches us that we're linked to the past generations of priests, even though our lives are radically different from their lives. Number 5, because it shows minority opinions that are respected, and the way to disagree is with proof text, not through pedigree, it opens up the discussion to all. It teaches that tradition is open to us and minority opinions will be respected on that basic level and preserved. 6, because the Gemara asks meta questions, it shows the importance of critical analysis and puts Amoraim on the side of the contemporary reader. So the Amoraim are vocalizing the questions that we too would be asking of the Tanaim about why they ordered it this way. What this teaches is that we're all asking the same questions of the Tanaim, whether we are Amoraim or moderns. And the best part, though, that I love is the highly relatable story. I'd say it's highly relatable because it's talking about the party animal sons of Gamliel. It's relatable both to the party animal people among us and also to the neurotic nerdy people among us as well, who want to know exactly the right thing to do. But if they're party animals, it'll relate to everybody. It's the perfect opening story because it casts a broad net of why people would want to study Talmud. So I believe that it is the best place to begin Talmud study. And I'm going to stop there so that people can talk it through, but my question is, how do you empower, motivate, and engage others in this Jewish endeavor, especially when you have a difficult text? How do you stay motivated in the hard texts yourself? And how do you help people extract meaning?
Heather, Yashar Kochech. I know it's incredibly hard for all of us to get things into a short amount of time, so I appreciate you being as concise as possible. But we certainly can take a minute or two to react to your teaching and your questions.
I really love when you said that when we disagree, we bring a proof text, we don't rely on pedigree. That really resonated with me. And Elise, you mentioned Beanie, so I feel like I need to step up my game. I just got to go full Purim on you. It's basically what I have to.
All right.
All right, now we're better. Now we're back.
Just have that lying around.
I think one thing that is important is when we do Daf Yomi, we're not doing something we often have done, at least I have done as a rabbi, which is pick and choose. I mean, in my pulpit, where I was not the senior, if you had a bar mitzvah in the Torah book of Leviticus, everyone read Kedoshim. So for like 8 weeks, they were just reading Kedoshim. It was decided that that was what we're going to choose. And of course, most of us don't read the entire Torah portion, so we pick and choose, even if we do the actual Torah portion. So I think there's actually a discipline and an educational challenge in telling our lay people and ourselves, we're not going to pick and choose. We're going to look at the entire Talmud. And so it's going to define for us what we study as opposed to our defining what we study. And I think that's a challenge. And I also think from a point of view of humility, that's pretty special to be able to try that.
Mm.
All right, kol hakavod. Our next Torah nugget and insight is a graphic commentary. We're going to try to share Jean's text that she created, and we'll turn it over to Jean.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy, for an excellent introduction. So as you know, on page 51b, there's this discussion about customs connected with the cup of wine during Birkat Hamazon. And the very last one is about sending it as a cup of blessing to the household, to bless your wife. So there's another Daf Yomi page called, I think it's Daf Yomi for Women. And Alyssa Gray from HUC New York occasionally puts up really long posts bringing in Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, and analyzing and synthesizing. And one of the things that she did with this post and with this particular story of Yalta breaking all the wine because of Ula's insult was to point out that this custom of sending the cup of wine as a gift to members of the household is a Bavli custom, that in the West, they didn't do that. So one level of the story is this whole political battle between Babylon and the land of Israel, and whose Judaism is the best, if I could say it that way, which is a little bit flip, but there you go. So just to recap the story, very Yalta, her father is the exilarch, so she is quite a high member of society and probably quite wealthy. Her husband is Rav Nachman, and Ula is a guest at their house. So at the end of Birkat Hamazon, when Ula has recited Birkat, and Rav Nachman asks him to send the cup of blessing to Yalta, and he refuses. Okay. Then I wanted to bring in another HUC person, this time from Jerusalem. Ruchama Weiss did a teaching at CCAR one year, which was all about this Yalta story. So like everything I'm doing, except for the very end, is based on what she taught. Okay, so we perhaps you remember that what Ulla said when he did not send the cup of blessing to Yalta was Rav Yochanan had taught, based on Deuteronomy, that the fruit of a woman's body is blessed only from the fruit of a man's body. And of course, it has to be an interesting reading of Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy says, Uverach peri vitnecha. But if you change the vowels around, it could be Uverach peri vitnech. So, you know, it's a Masoretic thing we got going on, which is later than, yeah. But, so the exciting thing is Yalta's reaction to this is not to just back off, but as you see in the text, Alta levechamra, she went up to the wine storage area and broke 400 jugs of wine. So in the original story, if in Ulla's version of things, the wine is really more closely related to the sperm, because we're talking about childbearing blessing, and the woman doesn't need it, she gets it from her husband. And Ulla's saying, and Yalta is saying, aha, you're not going to honor me with this cup of blessing. Guess what, bub? All this wine belongs to me. So if you draw out the picture, like as I have done, then you see, I don't know if they had floorboards in their house, but I'm making that part up. But you could imagine that her breaking 400 jugs of wine over their heads would result in all this dripping of redness down onto the men, which when you take it back to the whole childbearing thing, it goes back to, yes, men, we know you like to think that it all comes through you, but actually people are born from women in spite of that second creation story. Okay, so then that's all Ruchama Weiss is teaching, and it occurred to me, because my lens these days is all about the crises of our planet and trying to figure out how we can really get people engaged. That's my big puzzle. So I imagined, what if you thought of Ulla as humanity, right? Refusing to send a blessing to Yalta, thinking of Yalta as the earth, and the earth, not fight or anger, but just saying back, guess what? All this actually belongs to you. I can get rid of you. I can vomit you out, and then we'll have to start over. So I have 3 questions for you. You can answer none of them. One is, what do you think about this equating Ulla to humanity and Yalta to earth? Is this too big of a stretch? Is this doing like violence to the text? Another thing, what do you do that makes Talmud relevant in the world in any way that's important to you? And then lastly, if anyone would share thoughts about using a visual medium for this, I really need to know if this is effective, helpful, etc. So, speak.
I'm going to address your last question about visual application. I think it's wonderful, because those of us who teach know that that people learn in different ways. Some people need to read it, some people need to text it, to have the text in front of them, and some is a combination. So visuals that you can provide for such a complicated book, I think is wonderful. Kol hakavod.
Thank you. Thoughts on the whole Ulla being humanity and Yalta being earth? Is that going too far? Is it logical?
I think our role in teaching this stuff is to be midrashic. And so I think it's a fabulous midrash.
Thank you. Well, let me just close up then, because it sounds like that's the end of what you wanted to say. Rabbi Jane Littman was going to be on, and she apparently didn't make it today, but she wanted to point out that this is International Women's Day today. And so she was going to teach this text as well, and then it ended up that I did it. So happy International Women's Day, everyone.
Jean, I want to say how much I have loved you posting your art on our group page. I have loved that. It was one of these utterly unexpected, incredible gifts that just came like I was not, I thought, okay, text. That's what I was thinking. And suddenly these incredible pictures, and I'm curious as to about your use of speaking about your message and how you're seeing through things, your use of recycled materials that you have in the house to make all of these visuals. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, as I mentioned, the whole lens that I'm looking through is, here I am, this person who's using so many resources, and what I want to figure out is how to get people to shift their lives to use less resources. So it's actually been very interesting. I thought I was not using all that many resources. I have stacks and stacks of things from junk mail and packaging, and that's what I use for all my pieces. I am using archival glue that I buy, and I am using pens that I already had around. So I'm cheating for sure, but yeah, it's amazing how much trash I produce even when I try not to. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you. Yashar kochech to you as well, Jean. We wanted to have an opportunity for a bit now, after doing a little bit of learning together, to kind of step back and just reflect in general, either on particular insights that you surfaced about the text or about yourself during this, this experience of making our way through the first Massechet. Opportunity to share sort of how you've been going about it, how you've been making it relevant to yourself as a progressive rabbi, how you've made it relevant for other people if you're not only learning but also doing some teaching, and just kind of what's the lived experience been like for everyone in the group. So there isn't any real structure, but those are some of the questions.
I'm happy to jump in. I have to first of all thank Joseph for setting up the Facebook page, which really inspired me to start the Daf Yomi, because it was like, I didn't get it. I didn't get what Daf Yomi really was, to be honest. And it was like, oh, am I going to go on this Facebook page and then I'm going to study with this group? And then it became clear, that you study on your own. And then I have found the insights on that page to be really helpful. And the thought that I'm doing it with all these Reform rabbis, and it's just so, I've been talking to my congregation about it a lot, like that makes it much less lonely to do it by myself. So it's the first thing I want to really publicly thank you. The second thing is I started Daf Yomi when I was in Israel, because I'm in Israel for 2 months every winter. And I studied once a week at Beit Daniel with a bunch of very secular Israeli women. And, it was at the end of every week, there was like a sikum of the week, and then, like looking at all the pages. And I really miss that. I miss having this weekly class to look at the dapim of the week. And I'm trying to figure out how to find some other way to do that. The third thing I want to say is that I'm shocked. I mean, I did a lot of Talmud in HUC, and in fact, I just have to say I won the Talmud prize from Larry Hoffman in my year. But I just have to say I'm just finding the shock factor so not what I expected. Like, really, are we going to talk about defecating one more time? And really, you're checking women's underwear, and so much of that, I really feel like I'm doing it through the lens of a woman, and it really colors how it's like boys' locker talk half the time. And I'm just fascinated that this group of rabbis on the one hand can sit around talking about how to bless the rain. Like I found that page so meaningful and so beautiful, especially coming from really, really raining to Tel Aviv. How to bless the rain, ilufinu, to say to the rain. And then I'll talk about like defecating to the east, west, north, or south. And realizing that these are the same rabbis with the same sense of kedusha to all this. That like there's a sense of kedusha to defecating east, west, north, or south. That has really challenged me a lot. That's what I want to say.
Great. Just a quick reminder to everybody, if you can keep yourself on mute until you're sharing something, a few people are getting a little bit of feedback.
If I can chime in here, we've had this common vocabulary among observant Jews or rabbis or whoever of the same Torah portion week to week. With Daf Yomi, there's this added or new thing of having that page as part of our vocabulary. And it's not only with this Facebook group, I'm part of another group called Meme Yomi. Some of you there, I recommend taking a look at that. It's a whole new set of vocabulary that shared with people, and it's been very, very nice. I also, we recently had a bathroom redone here. And I'm thinking, all this way we're facing there. I'm facing west. The other one's facing south. Oh, this is good. Maybe Elise doesn't care about that, but I'm not going to pick on her. But we're okay. I'm also pleased because I'm doing it, so intensively, day after day after day, with recency and frequency. How my Aramaic has been woken up and is getting better from day to day. It's been, I did a weekly Talmud group here in Albany for about 15 years, but eventually it fell apart. And it's been about 10 years since I did any sustained Talmud. So it's good to get into it once again. Now I go back to mute.
I'd love to say something about the way that I've been studying it is my 4-year-old sees me studying it every night. And he comes into the room, he's like, Mama, what are you doing? And I told him I was studying Talmud. And he said, oh, I want to study Talmud. And I'm like, what 4-year-old says that? So he comes and he sits down next to me, and we were studying the page about peeing on a slant so it doesn't splash on your shoes. And on the same page, it was also like drink water so you don't have bad breath. And his 3-year-old little brother, my other son, came over and he said, Leo, come here, you got to read this Talmud. We're talking about peeing and bad breath. And I just thought it was so funny. And it's so motivating to show him that I'm taking it seriously, and for it to inspire him into seeing how it can be relevant to us as well. And it's hilarious. It's like kids say the darndest things like every day.
I want to bounce off that. So number one, I love the discipline factor of this that it's created for me. And a handful of years ago, someone said, if you want to go to the gym, put in your calendar repeat function, and then it motivates you. So I've done the same thing writing in Daf Yomi. I may have to move where it is on the day. And the other thing, yes, having those great conversations with my 3rd grade boy and all those other things. He loves reading ass instead of donkey. And I decided to bring in my congregation with it, mentioned at religious school. One of the teen madrichim heard me, and a handful of Mondays later at the high school program, the post-B'nai Mitzvah program, over pizza, she's like, are you still reading that daily book thingy? So it was just a great way to help Amcha come along with us.
For me, I'll say a couple bits. One, the struggle of this, like it's not easy. And, some days I find myself like, oh, I'm caught up. And then it's like, oh, how did I get 3 days behind, or so on and so forth, and just catching up. And I literally finished at like 2:00 today, thinking like, when is this thing going to be done? Am I going to actually be able to finish on time and be able to do it? But it's been really amazing. And one thing that I really enjoy is, so I made the decision of doing it with the PDFs, that I was able to get the core in PDFs. And I'm like, just putting random notes of like ideas of certain things. And yes, obviously with Berakhot, I'm like writing poop a lot and notes everywhere. But like the idea of just like when something comes up in work and life, to be able to just go and search for a word and like, oh, there's the note that takes me exactly to where that idea is. And it's been really amazing all the times that I'm finding that this is just so easy to teach, some of it, not all of it. But there's just so much to give from this, and people are really, there's so much depth and breadth to it. It's awesome. Really, really great.
I've found it a really humbling experience. I thought I had somewhat decent tech skills, and I'm being reminded on a daily basis how limited my knowledge of Tanakh is, how limited my knowledge is of the other piece of the text. I'm also enjoying, not only is there almost always some good nugget, from time to time you suddenly come across a text that you've always known and you just didn't realize that, Al tikra banaich ela bonaich is like, oh, this is where it's from. And the discipline of studying and having making my way through the text has my wife glares at me a little less now that I went out and bought the entire Talmud, and she was like, yeah, right, when are you going to use that? And so now I'm at least sort of making up for that expenditure.
I want to mention a very small piece, not the major thing, but when Don was talking about the Facebook group, that some people say, oh, you're doing something serious like with Facebook. But what's really neat is that you don't feel alone. Most of my study is by myself. It's just simply a time management thing. I do have some friends that I talk about it with occasionally, but the only regular connection other than receiving an email through My Jewish Learning, the Facebook pages. And I belong to about 5 or 6, but there's 2 that are my favorite, and this happens to be one of them. But what's also really cool is even on Instagram, there's a number of Daf Yomi connections. And it just helps me feel connected that no matter what time of day or night, other than Shabbat, that I'm studying, I know that I can connect with somebody else because there's somebody else who's studying, and they're either struggling with the text, or they're laughing at the text, or they're wondering why the heck this is in the text. So many different things, including the pictures that Jean shared, because I look forward to those as well. And it's just really nice to feel connected in yet another way with a whole bunch of people that I don't know. I mean, on this screen, I know Elise's name from Facebook, and I know Don Cashman's face from a few other places. But there's so many strangers who, even just talking with you, Andrew, at the beginning when we first signed on, I've never met you before. I've only seen your name. But talking with you was as if I already knew you, simply because we have this connection. And it's really, really cool.
That's thank you. First of all, thank you everybody for sharing. There had been a conversation about, do we make this event open to a broader community? And the sort of conclusion between the 5 of us who are all doing stuff today was, let's really create a safe, sacred space where we can fully be present with one another and make this the kind of communal experience that was ultimately at the original intention, was using this text to create another calendar of joint Jewish experience. To kind of bring us to a close of this Massechet, does everybody now have the text in front of you on the screen? And now would be a time to unmute.
Been practicing.
Got it.
So let's together do what we do, which is to use text to take notice of a moment that we're in, a moment not only of joint learning, but a moment of completing a Massechet, and at least for this particular Seder, even completing an entire Seder. So we're 1/6 of the way. So let's all join together. Yitkadam, Yitkadash, Shnei Rabbah, Bialma, Divrach, V'Yimlich Malchutei, Chayachon, V'Chayed, Agalav, Yisariv, V'Yimrim, Amen. Yitbarach, Vitadar, Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata v'miran bi'alma v'imru amen.
Al
Al
Yisrael,
Yisrael,
Al Rabbanan, Al Talmidehon,
V'al
Al
kol
Kol
talmidei
Talmidei Talmidehon,
V'al
V'al
kol
Oman, Midash, Beraita,
Dibat
Bibatra Hadin, V'di B'chol Atar Matar, Yehi Lahon L'chon L'shama Rabba, Hina V'chista V'rachamim, V'chayin Arichin, V'zonei Revichin, V'kana Mi Hadam Abu Hondi V'Shemaya, Ara V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishavah, V'Shamayim, Male Tovim, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Shalom b'mrama, u'berachamav, yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei teivel, v'imru. Amen.
Hadran alach Massechet Berakhot, Da'atan alach Massechet
Natan alecha Massechet
Berakhot,
Berakhot v'de'alan.
Mikvan Massechet Berakhot,
Lanit neshe mineach Massechet Berakhot v'lo neshi minas. Lo ba'alma hadenu, lo ba'alma da'ate. Yiratzon milchanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohimutenu v'imutenu. Shetehei Torat Chaim v'natzienu l'olam hazeh. Tehe imanu olam haba.
Rabbi Yochanan,
Gloria, Rabbi Akiva,
Yochanan
V'ahavna
Broya,
Adonai et divrei Toratecha b'fimu.
Eloheinu et divrei Toratecha b'finu u'b'fi amcha b'Yisrael. V'yeh אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל. כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה.
Margalab,
Rabbi Meir, Umar b'chol
ולשחוד על זלתי תורתי. מסור תורתי בליבך. ונגד עיניך תהיה יראתי. שמור פיך מכל חץ. וטהר וקדש עצמך מכל אשמה ועוון. אני אהיה עמך בכל מקום. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי,
Shem Shazratino L'Sayem Massechet
עזרתנו לסיים מסכת ברכות, אין תעזרני להתחיל מסכת סתות לספרים אחרים, ולסיימה, וללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים, וכל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לי ולזרעי, שלא תמוש התורה מפי זרעי וזרע זרעי עד עולם. ויתקיים בי, והתהלכתך, עמך אותך בשוכבך תשמור עליך, והקיצוצה משיחך. כי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים. ימים וימים ושמאלי עושר וטוב. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו.
Wow. Joseph, the floor is yours.
So Tractate Shabbat begins with a riddle that there are two types of carrying out on Shabbat that are really for by a person standing inside, and two which are really for a person standing outside. And what are the rabbis really talking about? They were talking about the prohibition against carrying something from one domain to the other, which was one of the 39 Melachot, 39 forms of work that you may not do on Shabbat. You were not allowed to transfer something from one domain to another. And this was based upon a place in Shemot in Exodus, chapter 16, verse 29, Let no one go out on the seventh day carrying a vessel to gather manna. The rabbis believe that there are two parts to the action of transferring an object, picking it up and putting it down. I once saw an advertisement, I think for Gold's Gym, where there's a really big muscular guy and they say, maybe I pick things up and I put things down. That was what he said. I thought of that when I said that was what he did. So you can deduce from this Mishnah that only if you do both of these actions, if you pick it up from its place, which is the rabbis call akara, and you put it down in a new place, hanacha, are you liable for breaking Shabbat. They then give this example that if a poor person is outside of your window, you are not allowed to give them a blanket or something by picking it up, reaching through the window, and putting it in their basket. If you do, you are breaking Shabbat. Likewise, they are not allowed to reach in through your window, pick up the blanket, and take it out and put it in their basket. However, the rabbis then explain, if you reach out your hand and the other person takes something from your hand, neither one of you has done the complete action, and therefore neither one of you is liable for breaking Shabbat. The formulation, two which are four, is a riddle to say that there are two ways of these transferring property, but if you multiply out who does what, you really get four actions that could be initiated from either side for a total of 8, some of which are forbidden and some of which you are not liable for because you're only liable if you do the complete action. So I can't help but wonder if the rabbis are winking at us right from the start, explaining a way we can get away with giving tzedakah in the form of some kind of material good on Shabbat. It is hard to believe that of all of the examples the rabbis could have chosen, the choice of a poor person is accidental. So this Mishnah inspired me to think of a different kind of two which are four, which is based upon two people and the 4 letters of God's name. And so I wrote a little poem based upon this Mishnah and based upon something I also read in Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's book, Inner Space. It's a Kabbalistic book. I thought I'd share that little poem with you, just as a way of thinking about two which are four. And the minute we go right into the Gemara, they're also going to share other things that are two which are four. And they use that formula to get us thinking. 2 people, 4 letters. The rabbis teach there are 2 types of reaching out that are really 4. The yud is the small coin of tzedakah. The hey, the 5-fingered rectangular hand giving. The vav, the outstretched arm. The final hey, the open hand receiving. Giving and receiving are part of God's holy name. Thank you.
I love the Jewish loopholes that have incredible meaning. And I like how you posited that it can't be an accident, that it has to be intentional. It's like we have laws for reasons, but it's like not forgetting the reasons for the law.
Back near the beginning of Berakhot, it might have been even in the first page, there was a time frame that was set around how long it takes, I think it was how long it takes somebody to eat, and it used the priests and it used the poor person. And it made me think, was that a stand-in for like everybody between the highest level and the lowest level, and kind of applying every rule that would come after to everyone. And it's really fantastic that you've also kind of universalized what is just an encounter between a poor person who needed something and somebody who had something to give. It has the capacity also to include all of humanity.
Something just to add also into the thinking about this that I learned which is that, remember, the Kohanim by the time of the Mishnah are all out of work. So there's no temple for them. So much of the honor given to Kohanim are in essence to the unemployed, right? They've lost their role. They've lost their world. They've lost their status. And maybe the idea of traditionally giving them the first aliyah or all of these things was a way of honoring them in a world that doesn't exist anymore.
From a God economy to a gig economy.
It's in many ways that might be part of what's going on here. And there are so many questions that this Mishnah brings up about insiders and outsiders, about what's the purpose of Shabbat in the first place? What are we doing on Shabbat? And one of the biggest questions is, why does the Massechet Shabbat begin this way? Like, why not begin with chapter 7, which these are the 39 categories of labor, and then it goes through them, and this is the last on the list, so they're beginning with the end. Is that because of the bookend artistry that the rabbis like? Just like we like to do a bracha before, we like to do the action and then we do a bracha afterwards, that there's this bookending that happens? Is it because Maimonides says that, well, carrying is the most common, also the most easily violated, so we got to start right from that? Tosafot, with most Rashi's grandchildren, talks about how most of this has to do with, carrying has to do with things that we prepare to get ready for Shabbat, so that's makes sense to start off this way, but I don't think we really know. And I would encourage everybody to read the incredible, beautiful meditation that was the Daily Dose of Talmud that came out today. Now I want to give the right attribution. Rabbanit Sarna. She had a beautiful meditation on outsiders and insiders, and she said that the solution is to invite them in. That if you're trying to work through a window, you're going to get into trouble. So hospitality is actually the answer. Invite them in, and then you don't have any problem. I just thought it was brilliant and wonderful.
I don't know if this will ever happen again in history, but it's nice that we're reading this right before Purim, because, Shabbat, we're told the Messianic age is Yom Shekulo Shabbat. And we're also told that Purim will not be canceled out when the Messiah comes. And we're also told by Maimonides that on Purim you give without any suspicion. Whoever asks, you give. So there might be a connection. Shabbat's important, but as we've said, that the spirit of helping those in need even trumps Shabbat.
Yeah, and that way it reminded me of the Hillel story, studying on the roof in the snow and him being kept out, and how they had to light a fire on Shabbat to save his life. And it's great at the beginning of Shabbat, Massechet Shabbat, to start by saying, yeah, there's a bunch of rules coming up, but don't let them get in the way of the spirit, which is to, feed the poor or clothe the poor or give them blankets, or, in the same way. Don't let these things, don't let your punctilious practice of Torah get in the way of your Torah practice.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that I love this being at the beginning, because it really starts us off with this idea that there are all these laws, we live by them, but we shouldn't hide behind them. They shouldn't keep us from doing the right thing. They should help us do the right thing. And so we have to sort of help the laws allow us to do the right thing.
I want to remind everyone that we can continue just to spontaneously post as we read on the Facebook page. That would be great. Massechet Shabbat is a lot more difficult. There's a lot less Agadah than there is in Berakhot. But as I think we can see, it's super rewarding. There's a lot to go through. And I did post in the announcements a sign up if you want to. The easiest way, there's almost 400 people in the group, and if less than half of us took a daf, we'd have a posting a day. That may be too much to plan. I don't know. or not, or we just keep it spontaneous. I really want this to be an absolutely zero guilt, lishma, come and go as you want kind of group. I know I have a lot more fun that way if I take the pressure off of myself to do it. I'm very intimidated by Massechet Shabbat, but maybe just keep it going, just post something. And I'm amazed at how many resources there are out there. There's now these podcasts, there's emails, there's all sorts of things. I wanted to share also something I found out. I know there's the Koren version of a Massechet, but if you really want to, like, I don't know, you decide that's a chapter I really want to study in the original, there is a edition of the Talmud called Tuvia's Talmud, and the whole thing is minukad, and it's everything. Rashi is minukad, Tosafot is minukad. There's somebody went through and took the main ones that they use, I guess, in the yeshiva world. I don't know the history of it, and made it. So that was a tool that was super interesting to me when I wanted to go, you know what, this part is super interesting, and I want to go into a deeper dive into the language. And that was, but I'm not going to just frustrate myself with an unvocalized text and trying to figure out where the period is. So that it was an in-between stage that I found super helpful for me.
First of all, thank you to Heather and to Jean and to Joseph for leading us in learning today, and to everyone for the learning that we're doing. We know from also the tail end of Berakhot that Torah scholars engaging in Torah study bring peace to the world, and hopefully we've all done a little bit of that ourselves. Hold the date for Monday, August 10th. It's the day of the final daf of Massechet Shabbat, and we'll try this or some iteration of this again. If you have any feedback on how we organized this or structured this Siyyum, please email me or private message me or just post it. And we really wish everybody a sweet and happy and joyful, but also a meaningful Purim as we make our way into this next period of time.
Thank you, Andrew, for being
Yasher Koach, thank you.
Yasher Koach.
Thank you all.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Hey, and the
Purim Sameach.
technology worked.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, man.
Bye all.
Bye.